potentially. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's In-Service podcast event. My name is John Carroll. I'm the CEO and founder of the Service Council, and I'm super excited to welcome Josh Weiss. He's the CEO of Syncron. We'll introduce more formally Josh in just a moment, but a quick wave to Josh, our featured guest today. Thank you to Syncron for bringing today's discussion to our community. I'm also accompanied by my colleague, Gerardo Pelayo, our Chief Research Officer, who will read and react and maybe share some of the latest research signals that we're getting from our ongoing benchmark series. We have a couple of in-market surveys and ones that we're heading and leading into that are really excited and topic relevant. So we want to welcome and encourage you to get involved in the discussion. To all of those joining on LinkedIn, we see you. Hello, welcome. We hope that you engage. Josh has agreed to think on his toes and read and react to any questions, comments that come inbound, and we'll try to make sure that we find time today. Today's discussion is set for somewhere around 30 minutes, depending on how deep we go. And without further ado, why don't I set the table topically speaking. So this topic, service parts, the key to service growth in 2026, I think is becoming a real important and critical part of the story. We reframed the people, process, technology, data storyline last year at the symposium to 5 Ps, carving people out into 2 segments, philosophy, people, and then having process, platform, converging data and technology together for interoperability, and lastly, parts. Service lifecycle management cannot function without the importance and focus on parts. That's the first thing I want to talk about. The second thing is, if you step back and you look at what's happening across industrial and service-based businesses right now, there's something very interesting that's unfolding, and that's that service parts has been treated and relegated to this operational necessity: inventory to manage, cost to control, logistics to optimize, suppliers to manage. And now we're seeing this shift where leading organizations are reframing parts as more of a strategic growth engine. And the data that supports why people are starting to look at it this way is quite revealing. Across industries, aftermarket industries in particular, OEMs and manufacturers, you've got to look at what the opportunity is with respect to parts from a profitability perspective. McKinsey has found that average EBIT margins for aftermarket are somewhere around 25%, and our research actually corresponds similarly to that number. And that's compared to roughly 10% for new equipment. There are a couple of examples of this. So BMW, as an automotive manufacturer, somewhere between 10 and 12 points of margin on new products shipped. On aftermarket, can reach as high as 50 to 65 points of margin. So there's a tremendous opportunity from a profit perspective. So that's one point. There's also this concept of, yes, we've got to look at, the efficiency gains. That's a major theme that we're really diving into right now, which seems to be a theme that's lingering since our symposium, this topic of process efficiency. And so technology and AI and all these things are pointed towards these enabling efficiency gains, but they're not necessarily the value driver that parts represents. Right, so parts can become a strategic advantage from not only an efficiency and an execution perspective, provisioning the right parts to be there right time, so you can avoid, repeat dispatches and second visits and parts shotgunning. But again, the storyline goes that the profit opportunity attached to parts can be quite significant behind that, and so. Today, we're going to explore this topic. We're going to dig in with Josh, the CEO of Syncron, and how are parts becoming part of this storyline to leverage and transition service to growth in 2026 and beyond. I am so excited to welcome Josh and unpack this topic together. Without further ado, Josh, I'll welcome you to the discussion. And why don't we start off with just a quick introduction to yourself, a little bit of your background, and a little bit about what you're learning As the incoming CEO, you're not new anymore, so there's a lot of learnings that you can share with our audience today so they can get to know Syncron a little better.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me, John and Gerardo. It's great to see you again. Just quick background, maybe the cliff notes. I have about 20 years experience in industrial technology. And a big part of that experience in being part of an industrial conglomerate is making hardware and hardware related products. And I can tell you just firsthand, having directly run our what we call technical services and support, a combination of field services and remote. It was always been a sizable part of our business, representing a lion's share of revenue. And I had seen, let's call it a front row seat on how it evolved over time, where, traditionally a lot of it was linking the operational efficiencies. But as we got into Service 2.0 initiatives and maybe even 3.0, 4.0, as we were even getting to it, it became a lot more about linking the customer lifecycle and the full customer journey, tying directly to those revenue and value drivers, things like customer loyalty, et cetera. I think everyone knows some of the statistics, like it's 5 times less costly to keep an existing customer than to acquire a new one in most industries, right? And so for me, that was a great firsthand experience that I've had the pleasure of going through directly during my background at a cliff note level. But as you mentioned before, I'm roughly 9 months in at Syncron. I saw a ton of the same opportunities just from my own direct experience in looking at purpose-built applications from the ground up that focus exclusively in aftermarket, and a serious, let's call it, missing piece in the full value chain of most of our customers, predominantly being the OEMs, in those capabilities, which is what I truly felt that Syncron is uniquely differentiated in. And it doesn't just happen overnight because there's such a high barrier to entry and complexity in doing this. So built on decades, we have roughly 25 plus years of history in working directly with our customers across the world to build up these capabilities and these specialization in aftermarket.
That's outstanding, Josh. Thank you for the introduction, and really excited to welcome you today and dig in on this topic and really unravel, the critical opportunity that parts represents. And thank you to you and your organization for our really extensive partnership that's been quite meaningful to our organization. So thank you. So I mentioned in my opening monologue, if you will, this focus on efficiency and how parts represents the growth lever. One of the things that I keep talking about is some of the concerning signals that I'm hearing around service losing its pathway to the C-suite, the boardroom, and becoming more of that cost center orientation and not necessarily that revenue and growth driver. Can you maybe talk a little bit about why 2026 actually is a moment to reframe service as that growth lever? Maybe you spend a minute or two introducing your viewpoints on that topic first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of it also is a symptom of maybe the current climate in many of the end markets for our customer base, and just a lot of different OEMs, whether it's automotive, heavy equipment manufacturers, et cetera. Most of them are projecting and anticipating a slowdown in new equipment sales on the back of a relatively slow past couple of years as well. But I think from my point of view, that the big idea or mindset is they need to not just look at that in itself, but really think, how can they leverage their aftermarkets business to directly drive additional revenue to compensate those shortcomings and those anticipated slowdowns in new equipment sales. And there's lots of data points behind it too, like the average life of equipment in most end markets continues to reach all-time highs. I mentioned before the benefits in retaining existing customers versus trying to acquire new customers. That's even more challenging in a slow-ish environment. So I think there's just a lot of areas that's probably they're going to be shortcoming if they just look at it from an operational lens or a cost center type of mindset, and don't continue on what had been historically a really nice step up for most of them, shifting towards that profit center, that revenue driver, and across that value chain in the current climate. But also in the long term, I think these things obviously, let's say, normalize out over time as well, and will continue to grow in importance.
Yeah, and if I could jump behind that, as you were describing your viewpoints, Josh, the movie Top Gun came to mind, the latest one. At some point, he's trying to teach them how to be fighter pilots, and they play what they call dogfight football. And the whole point of it is you have to play defense and offense at the same time. And it feels that in service parts, many of the leaders are playing defense and offense, but as a pendulum. Today, I'm afraid of tariffs. I'm afraid of geopolitical risks, everything that you mentioned, and I play defense. And then there will come a time to play offense until it's not anymore. And that's the wrong way to approach it. I think we need to get into the point of how do we use it to drive primarily growth, and the defense element of it is how to do it responsibly. You cannot do it at any cost. But in fact, many of the levers that service parts is able to provide from a defense perspective, it's about resilience, it's about reliability, it's about that availability that makes sense, that doesn't break the bank. And we have to remember that, staying with the football analogy, defense can also put points on the scoreboard. So I really like that as an initial setup.
Yeah, Gerardo and Josh, I concur with your viewpoints there. It's and not or, right? There's a dual focus on both growth and cost preservation, and that's an appropriate focus of next gen service leaders. So I think that's a really good point you make. Josh, let's talk about how the many organizations have invested in process improvement and technologies to enable such. Where are companies missing that connection between operational excellence and actual revenue and margin impact? Can you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I love the defensive and offensive analogy and the Top Gun reference as well, because I think it flows perfectly into the reality of the day-to-day challenges that a lot of our customers face. I think, like you framed up perfectly, it's not an either or; it really is an and. And to do it, it's a balancing pendulum that they constantly need to manage in equilibrium across all facets as well. Of course, like I look at the efficiency sides as kind of the must-have. You need to be agile in the current climate. You need to be quick. I think the pandemic was kind of wave one of agility on a mass scale. Then tariffs were kind of wave two, and it definitely has built up resiliency in a lot of our customer bases that we serve. We see a lot more proactive measures, and also in this kind of even the last couple of weeks, there's been other waves of tariff headlines grabbing the news. You just see the reactions different because they're prepared for it this time as well. So I do feel like they have made really good progress and step change, specifically for things like parts and parts availability through their value chains. And I do feel good about where that's at. Now, of course, efficiency is always a continuous process improvement, and they want to get better and better. But the real value, and like I said, from my own direct experience, I kind of did the quick math. I could maybe gain 1% point of margin here. I could defend it here. I could gain profitability here. But to really drive the needle and to really make a material impact, it really flowed through our revenue top line growth. And then that ultimately also flew through our gross margins and our profitability as well. And that's where unlocking aftermarket as a differentiator, including through parts and parts availability, just continues to grow in importance. I mean, if you look at customer satisfaction scores, one of the biggest areas that's predicated on it is just even having the right part at the right place at the right time. And typically right around the right cost basis as well, but it's also just heavily just on availability and availability in itself. And I see it as the OEMs and kind of the dealers and others involved in that ecosystem to ensure they have the efficiency side of that equation balanced out, but they have to meet that must-have from an end customer expectation. And that's typically where I see the linkage has been not nearly as strong. Let's say the connectivity, getting down into individual team-based KPIs and goals and bonus targets and et cetera, which is one of the kind of leading questions I like to ask is like, what makes each stakeholder, each different persona we interact with on our customer basis successful? And when you see it just that and that in itself, you typically see that mindset drive certain tactical decisions and initiatives and underlying projects, which we are trying to advise and influence our customers to think more holistically, to think about those true levers that ultimately add the most material effect to their value and to their overall contributions to the broader organizations that they represent.
I love the viewpoints. Gerardo, do you have a viewpoint behind there? It looks like you were about to comment. You're on mute, my friend.
Yeah. See, I was so eager to share it that I was like, I need to hold myself back, put myself on mute, and then so that I don't interrupt Josh. But I think you really hit a critical point, which is looking above and beyond the direct benefits that service parts provides. I asked myself, why is it that service parts is not widespread. It's not just generally seen as that critical engine for strategic growth. And the key metric that tends to be used is the profit margin that you get on sales, and that's good. And looking at the numbers right now, 48% of our respondents to last year's state of service supply chain reported a margin 40% or higher on service parts.
Mm-hmm.
Great story there. But then how does it relate to the rest of the service organization? And there's a lot of hidden revenue that we don't take into account, and that therefore makes it hard for others to care about service parts. Things like your renewal rates with customer, the shape of and the profitability of service contracts in general. You talked about customer retention and growth, a big one. One of the trends that we've been talking about is getting into this multi-vendor setting. So all of these things require service parts to be a core element of the conversation, and therefore one of the takeaways, one of the gaps that I see is aligning the way in which we're measuring the impact of service parts to truly represent those connections. The number one example that jumps to mind is, what is the impact of missed first-time fix because of service parts availability?
Mm-hmm.
That should be one of the standards. And like this, there's many examples across the service lifecycle.
Yeah, maybe just the point why it's actually getting more complicated in some regard too, tying to the average life of assets continuing to increase. Where I came from in my past experience, we made kind of Swiss quality products at the end of the day, we like to call it that, but they didn't break, and they would last for 20, 25 years. And these were high precision pieces of equipment that need to calibrate and maintained. But I can tell you technology changes and parts change over that time. So a lot of the critical components will go end of life at a certain point in time, which also just adds to the complexity, because the reality is you're not going to upgrade all your customer bases to the latest and greatest equipment in a lot of these different end markets. And so you need to really have data to empower the full, let's call it supply chain effect of even parts availability through the average life of equipment and assets increasing over time, which just adds another level of dimension of why you have to get it right the first time in some of these cases.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we saw, one of the big things we've been advocating for is the integration of supply chain into service in a way that is not just leadership structured, but also metric structured, right? So, if supply chain is causal in nature to achievement of service operation throughput, then these things need to be integrated in a way where we're measuring, the parts provisioning to, triage and diagnosis to, how are we enabling the first time fix rates through parts accessibility, on-time arrivals, and all the things that we need. Because to Gerardo's point, I'm not sure if I'm remembering the data correctly, but I think it was 1 in 3 service leaders signaled that greater than 30% of their first time fix rate misses were caused by parts. I think it was something to that effect.
Yeah.
So it was quite significant. And so how do we integrate the way that we measure these causal factors that erode our service throughput, which impacts cost, but impacts margin, impacts everything, right? So
fully agree. I kind of cringe every time I go upstream in the OEM world and see them doing S&OP based on historical demand planning and historical data without really leveraging the data down at a parts level intelligence sitting in aftermarket, and also to take into account a lot more leading indicators in some of those decision-making processes, which goes fully back into their suppliers and contract manufacturers and their full supply chain as well.
Outstanding. I'm going to take us back to this growth lever storyline for a moment, if I could, and then we'll get back into like some of the supply chain trends like resiliency and other things. So, we talked about the defense posture and then how leaders are turning to the growth mindset. If there is truly the observation that service is becoming relegated and not the pathway to the boardroom is being impacted by this cost orientation, and the profit and growth storyline is a miss. how do service parts help restore that narrative and help pave that way to the boardroom in terms of the impact of parts to that growth story? Could you share some of your viewpoints on the growth potential within parts?
Yeah, absolutely. Even at like let's say the macro level, as aftermarket in the current climate grows as a percentage of revenue, I would say that needs to have more visibility into it across the full enterprise at that kind of CXO board level, beyond just the historical, or let's say the traditional cost efficiency margin and cost center dynamics on it. So I think that's even just on the macro level, like right away, should increase relevancy because it has a more material effect. And in a climate like we're in right now with a lot of the end market slowdown and new equipment sales, et cetera, that in principle should also continue to grow in importance. But at a more tactical level, to instill, like, let's say, confidence and measures behind that, you need to take that down into tangible measurements and tangible growth drivers and value drivers linked holistically. That's one of the challenges. There's just so much data for a lot of big OEMs and customers out there. It's like, what really are the metrics that matter the most? And how do I have high fidelity confidence in the aftermarket data as it sits through ultimately the end consumers that they service in a cohesive way, where they have a single source of truth tying to a tangible KPI or subset of KPIs in a balanced scorecard approach to get there. And so I think that's kind of step one, but they have to look at it in the context of maturity curves, where they're at, the quality of the data and the siloed nature of getting different signals from end markets might be coming in, and all the other factors that go into it. Which typically I think that goes back to really having a good grasp and view of your current landscape, and having those foundational pieces in place linked tangibly back to the growth drivers that they're meant to represent at a level below than just revenue I mentioned there at the start. I think that's the macro signal, and then this is more of the tactical signals you put in place to instill that confidence and emphasis at the CXO level awareness.
I want to talk about the topic of resilience, and I know that this is a passion topic for Gerardo. So maybe we'll add his viewpoints into the discussion as well. So continues to be a major theme. How do parts and the overarching parts strategy move from just risk mitigation to actually helping companies capture more market and margin? Can you talk a little bit about some of the inhibitors that resilience can help alleviate, if that makes sense? And maybe we can start, Gerardo, I welcome you to the discussion, back to the discussion. I know this is a real passion topic for you. Yeah.
Sure. And the first thing to bridge between Josh's last comment, we just released our results from the KPIs and metrics survey for 2026. In there, those leaders who were focused on growth rather than efficiency were 3 times more likely to care deeply about supply chain metrics. So we are seeing that differentiator, but it's still not at the levels that I would expect. And resiliency is a great example in my view. It tends to be seen as a defensive measure and as a short-term solution as well. The number of articles and times it shows up in the news has dropped significantly since the pandemic. Then it had a height in tariffs, and now it's dropping again. We care a lot about customers and customer retention, customer growth, that customer experience. Resiliency becomes a lever for them to trust our supply chain, to trust that if something goes bad, that there's going to be a quick solution, and that there's a buffer behind it. So if we're trying to build those true partnerships and that level of trust in the relationship, which is more and more becoming a differentiator for maintaining that business, resiliency should be front and center. And service parts, again, plays a massive role in achieving that resiliency in a cost-efficient manner.
Yeah, I would fully agree, and apologize, John. I thought you were queuing in Gerardo there before, but I definitely have some thoughts as well. Yeah. Getting back to that defensive versus offensive analogy as well, I think the defensive side is kind of the must-have, like we're talking about in the world of tariffs and supply chain disruptions, et cetera. But then the next question to ask is, how can I actually turn that into an offensive play or an offensive strategy? Is there a premium associated to this if we are more resilient, that we have a competitive advantage that we could associate to this? Those are the next stages that I would ask and really work with our customers to understand how can they flip the script to not just be defensive and reactionary in nature, but flip it to offensive and figure out how they can associate that with getting back to the points of revenue accelerators or other ways to help make that shift and linkage to the top line ultimately as well.
I'm going to, please, Gerardo.
Sorry,
continue.
just a quick supplement to that, because you spoke about the service life cycle and looking at service parts within this bigger context. It's the intelligence that you can generate and that you care about from that stage in the life cycle that you're in, that is going to allow you to do things like margin optimization, for example, on the service parts that leads to that profitability, the understanding of the install base, and therefore what are the strategies from a service parts and a contracting perspective that are going to put you in the most advantageous situation. So that's where service parts goes back to what is the intelligence that I need, and then utilizing that intelligence to accomplish the financial outcomes and the customer experience outcomes that you're after.
Let's. I'm going to tell our audience we're going to go a little bit long here because this is a real meaty conversation and discussion topic, and I'm enjoying it. So let's continue here. We'll probably go about 10 minutes over. Let's get into the topic of AI and advanced technology, which both there's excitement and skepticism around. What foundational gaps are preventing companies from turning some of the tools into real parts-driven growth and all the things that we're talking about, this growth engine that parts represents? What's happening that's mitigating the impact of some of these tools, or perhaps even before realizing the value, maybe even creating challenge in terms of embarking on an AI journey or a technology journey around this part of the function of the business?
Yeah, I'll get this kicked off here. And certainly it's a dynamic age of AI, an age of machinery automation and so on that we live in right now. Just in the last couple of weeks, you guys have probably seen some of the headlines grabbing news out there and the potential for disruption across many industries. I still like to go back to the age-old analogy, garbage in, garbage out, though, specifically with aftermarket data. At least in the world that we live in today, AI in itself cannot generate and capture data, specifically data that's happening in the real world in itself, right? And so I go back into the real focus, that foundational piece is having high fidelity data. In our case, it's enriched around aftermarket and specifically parts intelligence to use as the starting point to unlock that through AI capabilities, which are rapidly growing. I do expect that to continue to mature. It's always kind of the question of where are we at on the different innovation curves and so on. But for me, that's really just drives the re-emphasis on having that single source of truth and high fidelity data to begin with to truly unlock AI's capabilities as it's defined today and where I see it going. The other piece I would add to it too, when you talk about things like what they call it, vibe coding and the ability to get into more of that business application intelligence layer, there's a lot of legacy applications out there. These subsystem applications that have been around for decades that are used to do warranties, claim scoring, as an example, or many different areas. From my wish list, I would like to see a lot of that be one of the areas they focus in on first, because that is also a barrier to prevent them from truly unlocking the business application element that I do think AI will help accelerate over time. Maybe that's a little bit too technical of a response, but I do see it as a barrier, as really a lot of these legacy subsystems that are out there and have been for decades to really look at that, because that will also enable the ability to generate more data enrichment specifically for parts and unlock a lot of AI capabilities ultimately at that application level over time.
Yeah, and I think the realized enterprise value from digital transformation efforts around parts and service lifecycle management, more broadly speaking, there's been a big inhibitor because parts has been a functional silo, not integrated with service operations, and so the interoperability, the sharing of data, the common language, those are some of the things. So I agree on your garbage in, garbage out comment from the jump there, because it's a real critical part of this. And I want to stay on this theme for a second, and that is, so now with leaders with the intention to embark on a parts journey to make this more strategic and growth lever, where do they start? What are some of the first initial steps that they can take to start to think about the pathway forward as a strategic service optimized organization?
Yeah, we actually, and this question is really timely right now because whilst I mentioned we have a rich history spread across many different industries and customers globally, we did see a growing need for more of a longer term horizon on a tactical level on how we engage with our customers. And so concepts like maturity curves, different phases, different foundational building blocks was something that we even went back to the drawing board and said, hey, like where did we start with this customer to where we're at now? And was there pieces of that puzzle we missed over time? And so I think really ensuring you have that baseline foundation at not just a system and technology for the technology's sake level, but the processes aligned and harmonized across the remit of the project, the program, the initiative, and even the enterprise into consideration at the start, and then the people side of the equation as well. The one trend we are seeing is a lot more global initiatives in nature, tying to some of the resiliency and uncertainty and so on. But where a project might have been within a specific division or a specific region, we're truly seeing our customer base that are global in nature think about these programs now holistically and globally, which means they also need to broaden that remit. But they can't go just to like a phase 2 or a step 2, step 3. They need to make sure they have that foundation consistently across their enterprise as well.
I think, please, Gerardo.
Just a very quick
I have some comments as well. Yeah.
I was going to say that what you just mentioned, both of you, is what gives me a hope that there's light at the end of the tunnel, because a lot of the ways in which technology has been used in service supply chain has been to clean up the data, to sort of organize it, create some dashboards, but most of the decision making is not as technology driven as it could. And I'm seeing some early signals, anecdotal conversations, most of that, but where supply chain decisions are leveraging technology in a scalable way, and because of the reasons that you talk about, that is how supply chain can become part of the bigger picture, because otherwise it just remains this very manual driven approach that has an impact within its silo.
Yeah, fully agree. Maybe just to jump in there, that translates down into cross-functional alignment too, which might be at a foundational level to do it, and things like KPIs, even project delivery teams. We're seeing a lot more of that, where historically it might have been run and shared and delivered outside of a single department, maybe with support from IT or other stakeholders. But we're truly seeing more cross-functional teams and that alignment from the get-go, which I think ultimately is like one of those critical success factors when you think back and look on past projects, past history, et cetera, that was often neglected or overlooked. And you're seeing a lot of learnings now to let's say, solve that from the start by that involvement and inclusion day one.
Absolutely. The other thing that I would say is, the old adage, start with the customer, work your way backwards. Well, who are one of the key constituents that's closest to the customer, the frontline, right? Yep. And so, we did a recent updated publication of an operating methodology we call the technician agnostic platform, which is, what are the desired functions, capabilities, and empowerment platform that's needed to be effective in front of the customer in that moment of truth, when and where you are. And the heat map suggested that asset history and telemetry and machine intelligence really high on the desired functionality priority list. Inventory visibility, really, really high. Technician to technician transfer of parts, really, really high. Right behind it, parts ordering capabilities, right? Mm-hmm. So spare parts and inventory planning and the desire to impact that customer experience in that moment of truth, really among the top critical capabilities that the frontline's requesting to support the customer. So I think that's another critical part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not talk about an example in mining where uptime is everything in the world of on-machine systems and telemetry data. I can tell you from their value drivers and parts availability specifically, uptime directly links to lost productivity and lost revenue, more so than anything on the impact to costs, margins, et cetera. It's all about uptime and uptime 24/7, 365. And I think that's just a perfect example of that end consumer, end customer leveraging telemetry data, time back to parts to show the level of emphasis that they think of it as.
and uptime avoids SLA penalties, but there are some organizations that are further down the maturity path in terms of outcome-based commercial models.
Yep.
And so uptime, of course, becomes even more critical. Let's talk about what's going to separate service parts leaders from laggards in 2026 as we round the bend here on the conversation. Maybe your viewpoints on, how, those still stuck in that efficiency only mindset. What is going to separate those that have turned their attention towards growth from those that are still stuck? Maybe you could spend a minute or two talking about that.
Yeah, it's almost like a mindset shift of thinking of parts not as inventory or cost or capital committed, but really as a strategic asset at the end of the day that is income producing in nature over the life of that asset or that life of that part, even at a tactical level. And so clearly you have to link it towards resiliency, availability, and so on. But that linkage to revenue and that mindset shift of thinking of inventory and parts, not just as a cost or a capital element, but as a true income producing asset over the life of the asset, is just fundamental for me. And that really gets into that life cycle view, not just transactional view of how parts maybe historically have been thought of in the past. And then getting into areas like circular economy concepts and leveraging across a lot of the complexity, and how can they even leverage and extend that life of that asset and that part in that case, but looking into areas like new concepts they could unlock, like refurbishing, repurposing. Reverse engineering is a big common term in the aerospace MRO world, where they're disassembling and they're inspecting every single part at every single phase with well beyond just engine hours and other types of telemetry insights into it to make those decisions. I see a lot of that could really apply into other industries like heavy equipment manufacturers or large scale assets, because the life of those assets is reaching close to parallel equilibriums, if you will. And so I do think there's that piece right there that they can really unlock right away, starting with the mindset shift and then taking that down into an operational and more tactical level.
That's a really cool point you make there on the reverse engineering. I love that. Gerardo, do you have any supplemental views?
So hard to follow that. I think Josh really nailed it. But I'll wrap up with a warning, if I may, which is one of the data points from our KPIs and metrics survey was that less than 1 in 5 service leaders are prioritizing supply chain metrics as a means to get executive influence. That should be a signal that we're not connecting the storyline that Josh talked about properly. Because if we did, service parts should be that lever and should help us get the buy-in from different stakeholders across the service landscape. So thinking about how do we accomplish that, how do we turn service parts into a lever from an executive influence is going to reshape the way in which we measure it, in which we invest on it, and in which we pursue the objectives from it.
Yeah, Josh, why don't I supplement Gerardo's viewpoints on the cautionary tale with the silver bullet question, right? As we leave our audience today with moving ahead and recognizing this opportunity that service parts represents, if there's just one mindset shift about service parts heading into 26, that what should it be? What are your viewpoints on what leaders should think about or take away from today's discussion?
Yeah, I think just to summarize basically everything we've discussed in that single takeaway, if they do all these things and do it well, it is a competitive advantage for them at the end of the day. And I see it as a competitive advantage in the short term, not just tied to some of the trends like I mentioned before with shortfalls in new equipment or new asset sales, but also medium long term as the life of these assets, as the differentiators from customer satisfaction, loyalty, renewals, all of that continues to grow in importance. And so I truly think, just to summarize it, that if they do this and do it well, it's a competitive advantage it gives them.
Great viewpoints. He is Josh Weiss. He is the CEO of Syncron. If you're looking to learn more about Syncron, you can visit their website. Syncron will also be with us, bringing a workshop to our community in Wilmington, Delaware, at our host, Agilent Technologies. We'll be talking and expanding the conversation and dialogue around these same topics. So we encourage you to inquire about the opportunity to join Syncron with us in Wilmington, Delaware. That's in 1 week, actually. That's the 19th of February. So it's coming right up on us. But I wanted to thank you, Josh. This was a really great resource for our community, and encourage our community to engage with you and your team to learn more. Thank you for joining today's discussion. It was really, really deep. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Outstanding. Gerardo, as always, thank you. To our listening audience, we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for joining us today and spending a little bit more time than we had planned. A great, rich discussion, and I hope it was valuable for you. Thank you so much.